Now for gas transport, and this really tells us how the different gases, how oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported in the circulatory system. So blood has to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and the body cells. And sometimes these gases can just dissolve in plasma. Other times they are going to have to combine with other chemicals in order to be transported. And we'll kind of see how this works in the terms of oxygen transport. So the majority of the oxygen that is transported in the blood will be attached to hemoglobin. It will bind to hemoglobin, and in order to make oxyhemoglobin, and you'll see that the majority of oxygen is carried that way. A very small amount of oxygen is going to be dissolved directly into the blood plasma. Hemoglobin, each hemoglobin molecule has the ability to carry 4 oxygen molecules. These oxygen molecules bind very loosely to iron that is found in hemoglobin, and these bonds between the oxygen and hemoglobin are very unstable. As soon as it reaches a part of the body that needs oxygen, that bond will break and oxygen will be released. And really what happens is that it releases just one of the 4 oxygen molecules. So when we say deoxygenated blood, it actually means that hemoglobin has 3 out of the 4 oxygen molecules that it can carry. So it'll be about 75% saturated with oxygen, yet we still call it deoxygenated blood. Here you can see the transport and dissociation of oxygen. So in order to carry oxygen, as we said, that the difference in partial pressure between oxygen in the alveolus and oxygen in the capillary helps the diffusion of oxygen in the lungs from the alveolus to the capillary, and then through the arterial circulation, it gets pumped through the left side of the heart, through the aorta, to the different tissues. And in the tissues, the diffusion will occur in the opposite direction. It'll occur from the blood vessel to the tissue. We're talking about oxygen here. And then now what is considered deoxygenated blood will return to the right side of the heart to perform that whole function all over again. And again, in tissues, it usually just lets go of one of the 4 oxygen molecules, where the deoxygenated blood is 75% saturated with oxygen. Now, how does the oxygen get released from hemoglobin? What are the conditions that will favor the release of oxygen from hemoglobin? One of them is decrease in the pressure of oxygen levels. So when blood reaches areas that have low partial pressures of oxygen, that oxygen will dissociate or leave the hemoglobin and go to those tissues. Oxygen also dissociates from hemoglobin in areas that have increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, which means that there's a lot of metabolism going on that has released lots of carbon dioxide as a waste product, and now this tissue is in need of oxygen. You can also translate the increase in pCO2 into an increase of acidity, and we already know how that works, or a low pH level. Increase in body temperature. So when blood reaches areas of the body that have higher body temperatures, for example, if there's an area of an infection, the infected area usually has, remember the signs of inflammation, one of them was warmth. So that increase in temperature in the infected or in the inflamed areas also helps release the oxygen from hemoglobin. Now for the transport of carbon dioxide, that's through 3 different ways. The first, and the most common way, is Well, carbon dioxide is transported as part of a bicarbonate ion. So again, that infamous reaction that we've mentioned over and over again during this chapter, that is the main way carbon dioxide is transported to the lungs. The other two ways could be that carbon dioxide is either just dissolved in plasma or binds to hemoglobin to form carbaminohemoglobin. And here you can see how the carbon dioxide is transported, diffuses from the tissue into the blood. Again, some of it dissolves in plasma. Some other carbon dioxide will combine to hemoglobin to make carbaminohemoglobin, but by far the number one way of transporting carbon dioxide will be where inside of the RBC it combines with water to make carbonic acid that then dissociates into hydrogen and bicarbonate. That hydrogen ion is going to combine with hemoglobin. The bicarbonate ion, though, is going to diffuse out of the red blood cell. But because of it being a negative ion, the red blood cell needs to gain another negative ion in exchange, and that's known as the chloride shift. So the chloride shift is where a negative chloride ion enters the RBC in exchange of getting rid of the bicarbonate ion that was made in that process. And again, this maintains the electrical charges found inside of the RBC. Now what happens when that red blood cell now reaches the alveolus? Well, the carbon dioxide that was dissolved in plasma, that obviously has no problem. It can just diffuse into the alveolus and then get exhaled. The carbon dioxide that was carried as carbaminohemoglobin will break down into hemoglobin and carbon dioxide, and again, carbon dioxide diffuses. In the case of the carbon dioxide that was carried as a bicarbonate ion, that whole reaction would have to reverse in order to make carbon dioxide again. It would diffuses into the alveolus, and that is also exhaled. So the gases entering the blood, oxygen, about 99% combines with the iron atoms found in hemoglobin molecule to make oxyhemoglobin. And while the remaining about 1 to 2% dissolves in plasma as oxygen, carbon dioxide, you have about 70% of it reacts with water to make carbonic acid and then dissociates to make the bicarbonate ions. Some carbon dioxide will combine with the hemoglobin to make carbaminohemoglobin, and a little bit of it will dissolve in plasma just as regular carbon dioxide. Lifespan changes for the respiratory system, well, those are usually due to the different environmental factors that we are exposed to, whether it's pollution, whether it's smoking, or just due to the effect of age on the organs. So you'll find that the cilia becomes less active, the mucus starts to thicken, cough reflexes, for example, slow down, which means that we are now more prone to infections because cough is protective. Macrophages lose their efficiency. Breathing starts to be more of an effort because of the stiffening of the costal cartilages, which are the ribs, the cartilages related to the ribs, and changes in posture. So as we age, our posture changes, and that changes the shape of the thoracic cavity, and that could affect the lungs and eventually affect breathing. The alveoli start to damage and merge, and that decreases the gas area, the area for gas exchange. And that concludes chapter 19.